Good afternoon and welcome to D&I One-on-One. This is now a monthly webinar series where we talk about different topics related to culture, inclusivity, diversity, belongingness, and all of that stuff. Today's conversation is all about JEDI. JEDI conversation. We'll actually define that here in a minute. But before we do, introductions. I'm Jina Etienne. I'm the creator and host of the series. I'm a certified diversity executive, and my work is centered on something I call fearless inclusion, which I define as the freedom to be yourself and the ability to create space for others to do the same. I develop trainings and workshops, as well as facilitate conversations and programs focused on helping participants connect mindfulness and self-awareness to their daily actions and words. And the goal of that is to foster awareness and around the collective intention in an organization so that they can create psychological safety where inclusivity, we're expressing that as an intention, and the outcome of that is belonging. Joining me today is Ingrid Edstrom, Chief Empowerment Officer of Priestess of Profits, LLC. All right, now, folks, she's got a lot of certifications. Woodard Certified Business Coach, Positive Intelligence Mental Fitness Coach, Certified Working Genius Consultant. I need to hire you for that one, Ingrid. Certified Offers and Needs Market Facilitator. She's also co-founder of the Accounting Alchemy Network, which is how we came to know each other and work together. She's a thought leader, she's passionate, and she has some brave new, really creative and thoughtful ways about how we can leverage our knowledge and expertise and skills and presence in the accounting profession to make a difference in the world. Ingrid, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Jina. I'm so excited for this conversation.
So the conversation today is all about, okay, I'm going to click something and I hope I don't break anything. Hold on. Whew, I didn't break anything. I'm new, folks, bear with me. I'm new to this platform. So the conversation today, facilitating JEDI conversations. And Ingrid, you know, when you and I were first talking about this and planning for this webinar, you actually said, or I don't know if you said or I said these words literally, facilitating JEDI conversations, and boom, it popped into my head. We need to do a program about this because so often we know what the ED and the I are, but we don't talk a lot about the J. Now, we want to know what other people think about the J, but do you want to have any thoughts you want to throw out there just to sort of frame our conversation today?
You know, I think that the facilitating part is also important to touch on. You know, if we think about the word facilitating, facilitate literally means to make easy. How do we make conversations about some of the most challenging topics in our world easier so that they're not daunting, intimidating, and we're not avoiding them? And I think that that's going to be kind of at the heart of what we're talking about today.
Oh, I couldn't agree with you more. Uncomfortable is some place that none of us want to be. But sometimes you got to be there to make change happen, right?
Yes.
So let's start then and see what our audience thinks about when we say justice. So can we go ahead and launch that poll?
Sure. Let me get that up and running here. All right, there we are. Poll number 1 is live on your screen, and I'll leave them open for a minute. Go ahead and check all that apply.
Now, we came up with a couple of ideas here. Fairness, truth, impartiality, that's 1. Punishment and incarceration is 1. Administration of the law, rights and responsibilities. But we're not suggesting we know all of the choices here. So, you know, once this poll is closed, what we invite you all to do is drop your thoughts and your ideas in the Q&A. As we go along, actually, we'd love this to be as interactive as possible. And so there's no chat, but you can drop it in the Q&A, comments and observations.
All right, I'll read you the results so far. So big chunk, 47% have said fairness, truth. And then let's see, it's a close tie, 18% with rights and responsibilities and administration of the law, 12% punishment, incarceration, and 5% prefer not to answer. Back to you.
All right. Well, Ingrid, can you see those results?
I can't see them on my side, but I thank you, Autumn, for reading them off.
Yeah. The majority is coming back with fairness, truth, and impartiality. So I don't know, maybe this is a place we start the conversation defining the J, because we hear a lot of diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging. We don't hear a lot of justice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when we think about justice, that fairness, truth, and partiality versus punishment, incarceration, I think it's really comes down to where each of us is at this point and our dominant systems and paradigms. And actually, Jana, I think maybe hopping to the next slide, unless you want to speak to the little subtitles that you put under each of the justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion.
So you're talking about the one that, what is the definition of justice?
Oh, no, I was thinking the paradigm shift.
Oh, let's do that. Yeah, sure. Oops, I'm clicking on my screen and not this screen. Folks, we apologize. This is a learning process for us all. So reframing justice, old paradigm, new paradigm.
Yeah. So when we think about justice in the old paradigm, we're often thinking about that crime and punishment idea. Ideas of blaming and shaming. If somebody does something wrong, there's this idea of good, bad, right, wrong, yes, no. And often when it comes to JEDI discussions, black and white, and our current criminal justice systems that are unfairly incarcerating people of color. Stereotyping that the old paradigm is divisive, and it's built upon a power over paradigm, which is a zero-sum game. Zero-sum game basically meaning that in order to win, somebody else has to lose. And so the winnings of one person are made up of the losses of others. And there's a lot of kind of toxic myths. Lynn Twist talks about this in her fantastic book, The Soul of Money. She calls them the 3 toxic myths, the idea that more is better, that there's just not enough to go around. And so in order to have more, we have to take it from others. And that's just the way that it is. So there's no point in questioning that system and the status quo. And what we're trying to do is shift to a new paradigm that is focused more on what does restorative justice look like? How do we heal the issues of the past and create more opportunity for each of us to show up in our full human selves, recognizing that we don't have to be perfect? How do we create curiosity and acceptance, witnessing, which is a power with paradigm, where true power is seen as being able to empower each other so that together we have the power to do amazing things, and that together we can all win more. And so it's a bit of a shift from the old way of thinking to the new way of thinking. And it's a big shift when it comes, especially thinking about justice, because oftentimes when one person is saying, you know, we want justice for this group of people, someone else might be thinking, oh, well, that means they want to punish someone.
Right.
And I'm wondering how we might be able to shift away from that response that's going to create a natural fight, flight, freeze response in our brains to leaning into the curiosity and acceptance of what could healthy, effective justice look like.
See, I told you she has lots of amazing thoughts and ideas and wisdom, because you've done a lot of reading and work in this space. And one of the things we do plan to do in this webinar is we want to walk through each of these, because when it comes to facilitating what we call JEDI conversations, it's about being able to engage comfortably, possibly initiate, or perhaps participate in a more thoughtful way, potentially challenging the status quo discussion that might be happening that you find. And so, you know, just from a J perspective, Ingrid, my experience has been when you hear the word justice, political divisiveness sort of starts popping up. People stand in their beliefs around it being race-based or punitive in nature, or if you are in the justice system in the United States, it's because you did something wrong. Why else would you be either arrested or incarcerated or punished? And so if we're going to talk about justice in the context of diversity, equity, inclusion, culture, belonging, identity, and if people were to just take one thing away, what's important to understand about the idea of justice so that the next time it comes up in a conversation, we're not so like deer in the headlights, I don't want to say it, avoid it?
I think recognizing that there has been unfairness and inequity in our justice systems, to be able to approach each of those very human experiences with an open mind and open heart, to be able to implement more effective deep listening and recognition for the whole situation, to see and approaching it with the question of how do we heal this rather than how do we punish, as if somehow punishment is going to is going to equalize a wrongdoing.
Right. I love, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to speak really quick. I love what Jessica posted in the Q&A.
Yeah.
I think that how the justice system has now been tainted with politics, yet I have faith it will change. And I love that grounded optimism that you're bringing to that statement, Jessica, the idea that change starts within each of us. And our dominant systems, our political systems, our justice systems, our economic and financial systems emerge from the culture that we are creating, and that each of us gets to create that culture within ourselves and how we interact with each other. And I think that that really leads us into the other elements as well.
Yeah. And in fact, let's move into the next element and find out, before we talk about it, what our participants think about equity. So Autumn, if we can go ahead and launch that poll.
Yes, our poll number 2 is live on your screen. Go ahead and check all that apply.
I'm so glad, Ingrid, that you shared Jessica's comment, because when I read it, I thought, I mean, I really love the fact that she added the word faith, because too often I think we get dismayed or dejected, or we check out because it feels like nothing's going to change, or this doesn't work, or the system doesn't function the way I think it should function. And so I check out completely, rather than having faith that if I participate wholly and fully and engage in ways that can hopefully keep the conversation open, we can start to see some of that change.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I'm going to jump in, Jina. Let's see. 35% have said fairness, 26% equality, 18% access, 15% balance sheet, 6% not to answer.
I did not write those down. I was hoping I could see the results.
I don't think you can. Would you like me to read them again?
Oh, no, here it is. I see it. Thank you. Balance
Great.
sheet is the majority of it. Fairness and equity. It's really split across there. And it's really interesting, Ingrid, because when we came up with this question, we knew that accountants might more likely jump to balance sheet, but the fairness one pops up the most. What do you think about equity and fairness? What would you like to say to that? I'm actually going to go to the cartoon. Is that okay?
Yeah, go for it. I love the cartoon.
So when we were talking about this, and when the idea of putting this cartoon came in here, it was because this idea of equity, often people think of it as just about fairness, and fairness means we all get the same thing. But that's not necessarily the case.
I love how it goes into the reality and also what liberation looks like. That it's not just the difference between equality and equity and how those things are different, but it also gets into, hey, some people are standing way above just by where they were born and the circumstances they were born into. And how do we actually tear down the walls? What would that look like? What would it look like to have a world where we're liberated from these systems that are getting in our way?
I want to point out something here in case anyone else is noticing it or thinking about it. And that is, all of the people that you see illustrated here in the cartoon are people of color, or at least appear to be people of color. And I think what worries me sometimes is that people see illustrations like this and then they immediately dismiss it. And instead of recognizing that what we're talking about is the experiences of different people, different groups, different identities. And in this case, the assumption, the illustration is really showing that different people, and their sizes here, not necessarily colors, have different needs, and those needs need to be fed in different ways in order for everybody to have the same opportunity. So I just wanted to point that out, because I worry sometimes that we see things like this and people think it is divisive, and so they don't want to talk about it at all. Now, I just noticed that Ingrid's camera disappeared. So Ingrid, if you can give an audio, if she's still here.
Let me check.
I was about to say, I don't even hear Autumn. Did I disappear?
Oh, no, Ingrid did disappear. You're right. Oh, no.
Oh, no. Well, hopefully Ingrid will be back. And in the meantime, one of the things I want to share about this is that often we get this notion that in order for, especially in the workplace, if there's a resource that's available, everybody should get that same resource, because if it's going to help, it's going to help everyone. And what we've now learned is that different people have different needs. Some people, think of it in a simple way. Some people are early morning people, and some people do better in the evening. Some people are caregivers, and they're taking care of someone with a disability versus children. Some people might work 2 jobs. And as a result, what they need is going to vary person to person, sometimes day to day. And so what we're understanding, equity creates fairness when we give different people the different tools and resources that they need based on their situation, versus equality. If all of us get the same thing all the time, there might be some of us that are getting things that, we don't find helpful or useful. So I think understanding the equity piece is really important, because when we talk about equity, a lot of times in organizations, you hear the focus is human resource benefits, which are important, but the conversation is much broader than that. Now, there's a comment that just came in that says the cartoon reinforces the false narrative that diversity is a zero-sum game. And I think it's really interesting that that's the perspective. I'm not completely sure I would agree. So if you could do me a favor and drop back into the Q&A a little bit more about how you see that, I would love to share that and see if I can understand where you're coming from on that one. And then somebody just shared that it's a good point about the people pictured. Now I want to move on to this next slide, and I hope Ingrid can join us again and share her insights here, because we were collaborating on putting this together, specifically because most of the people attending the session today are accountants. And when you look at equity, so often we think of equity as just the result of something. So you have assets, you have liabilities. The net of that is equity, along with your profit and your loss. I mean, we're accountants, we all know the formula. But what if we looked at equity a little bit differently? In the context of diversity, inclusion, justice, belonging, what if we looked at the assets as the things we have that can serve us, the things that work for us, the things that we can use as resources, if you will? Our time is a precious resource. Being that emotional wellness and well-being, physical health, being healthy, the diversity we have around us. And diversity, we'll talk about that in a minute, but we're not just talking about racial diversity. The world we live in, our living world, water, air, all of these things serve as resources that allow us to do what we do. Now, next to that, you have liabilities. And when we look at liabilities, we're looking at things like the barriers that some of us face. And we all face different barriers. Systemic barriers don't only affect minorities. Systemic barriers affect everyone that's a part of the system, just in different ways. We talked here about political unrest, social unrest, emotional, psychological trauma. All of these things keep us from bringing our full self forward and participating and engaging. But if you look at those two things together, the things that are working for us, the resources we have, the things that are working against us, the things that hold us back and cost us things, if you can minimize those things that have a draw on our energy and our spirit and our wellness and psychological safety, if you can draw those down, the potential for that is wealth. And wealth here is defined differently. There's actually a quote. Let's see if I can find it. Here it is. Wealth is the sum of your wellness and well-being, and it is your greatest asset. And I think what's important to recognize here is that when we talk about wealth in this context, we're talking about things that can sustain us perpetually. In other words, it's not something that we only have in a temporary state. By protecting those resources, by protecting those assets and minimizing those costs and those sacrifices that we have to pay, it puts us in a position of being able to sustain, move forward, and grow. All right, let me come back to Timothy. I see. So folks, again, I'm going to just ask you for your grace because I am still figuring out this platform.
Can you see the ones I moved into priority there?
I can. How do I tell what? Can I tell what order they came in? Are they sorted a particular way?
The latest one should be at the top.
Okay.
Oh, and I think we have Ingrid back.
Yay. Hi, Ingrid.
Hi, I think the site actually crashed. Everything seemed to be working on my side, but it said the CPA Academy site was taking too long to load and wouldn't bring it up.
Oh, well, welcome back. We're happy to have you back. I was walking through the balance sheet equity idea, and what I shared was how assets are those things.
Sorry, I had to take my phone off airplane mode trying to reach Autumn by phone.
No worries. So I defined assets are all of those things we have. I did use the word resources in the context of the things that are available to us that build us up, make us stronger, and help us to do our work, help us be, if you will. And the liabilities are the thing that drain us. They hold us back. They limit us. And it minimize the things that are costing us something.
Mm-hmm.
And optimize those things that are naturally available to us. Look at the difference, the equity. And we just got to wealth. I read the definition of wealth. Someone in here says wealth, what a smart word. Do you want to talk about this since you just came back and joined us? And this is
Sure. Yeah, I found out that word, that smart word, derived from the author Carrie Taylor from her book One Living System. I met Carrie. She was participating in a course that I was taking, the Pachamama Alliance's Introduction to Community Climate Action Training course. And she was in the same cohort that I was of that course. And her book launch was kind of her main focus in her project. And getting to meet with her, she's actually in Australia. And the way that she explains this idea of wealth, as you said, Jina, is the sum of your wellness and well-being and is your grandest asset. And when we think about how often we are sacrificing our wellness and well-being on the altar of profit, of financial wealth. And especially in the accounting profession, where we somehow like glamorize and offer this badge of valor for martyring ourselves on behalf of the work that we're doing. What if it didn't have to be that way? What if we could create something that's more effective? And when we think about wealth as our grandest asset, but yet we summarized it as like, this is the summary of all of these pieces in the equity, we can start to recognize that it's an upward spiral of a system that builds on itself. That when we have that wellness and well-being and we're focused on being based in our values in the work that we're doing, that we're creating a rising tide that raises all ships. Whereas if we are really focusing on creating, focusing on the liabilities, what we're sacrificing to create just the financial well-being and sacrificing our wellness and well-being in the process, we are disintegrating that system and it is not sustainable, effective, or very much fun to think about it.
Yeah.
So really just trying to shift the way that we're working in general to focus on what's truly important.
And one of the things that you just said, and I wrote it down here, I hope folks picked up on it, that as we're growing, as we are growing and we are expanding and we are getting stronger, our assets are naturally growing as well. So by putting our resources into all of the right things and into restoring ourselves and not focusing on the dollar, can you imagine how effective we could be? It does require us to think differently, though, and to tell a different story, if you will, about. And I know these are words we've heard. We've talked about in other sessions. Tell a different story of money, and I think that's because our profession, too often, it's only invited us to give dollar values, and then we can opine on those values, but in a very limited way. Because once we start sharing and talking outside of that box, what are you talking about? You're an accountant. You're not supposed to talk about these things. We get stuck in a box, if you will, and we have an opportunity to do so much more than that. Yeah. I'm going to put this up here because of what you just said. Measure what matters. did you have a thought? I think you might have been going to this point before I went backwards a slide.
No, I think you're rocking it and making values the top priority. How do we shift our priorities to make it so that our values and beliefs, what's truly important to us, our families, our emotional, physical, and spiritual well-being are at the top of the list?
Yeah.
Our current system has trained us from a very young age to believe that we have to sacrifice those things for money.
Yeah.
To be in this hamster wheel of work to make the money, to get the things that we want, to survive, to build, the American dream of equity, to be able to pass along something to our kids when we die. All of those systems are built on things that maybe aren't really serving us. And it's time to start asking questions of how do we create systems that actually feel good to us, that are creating more effective lives and livelihoods for all people in collaboration. And it is possible if we just start asking the questions and having the discussions.
I would add to that allow us to live in the present. Because one of the things that came to mind when you were talking just now is how all of those rules and those stories that we were told work now so you can ... later.
Yeah.
And so we are building equity over time. So at some point in the future, some magical moment, we can now enjoy that equity.
Exactly
But
right.
what that does is it means we are breaking ourselves down constantly over and over and over. And by the time we get to enjoy the so-called enjoy the equity, we're exhausted, right? And we call that retirement. But what if we didn't have to retire and we could just live in this state of fulfillment and gratitude and wholeness? Can you imagine? Then we're experiencing and enjoying that equity the entire time.
Yes, absolutely.
Next definition, diversity. We didn't have a polling question here to ask you what diversity is. And I think the reason for me, Ingrid, that I thought we don't need a polling question here is and what I hope you see on this slide, the iceberg, diversity is just all of those rich differences within each of us. That diversity isn't just the usual stuff, race, gender, age, gender identity, disability. By focusing on those, what are those 5 elements that I just listed? That's how it feels a little bit political. And a lot of those views, the fact that we lean into and almost only see those dimensions of diversity when we talk about diversity and inclusion is because they're rooted in, the language that came out of anti-discrimination, equal protection laws. Those were that started in the 60s and the 70s, and there's a reason for that. But when we're talking about diversity today, in particular in this industry that we're in, we're talking about the full diversity of all of us. And those pieces of our identity that are really meaningful are more likely to be those that are below the waterline here.
Yeah, I love that you have this waterline and this graphic. And those invisible dimensions, that's how when we lean into those conversations and listen more deeply and we start to learn about each other in more human ways, we can invite those invisible dimensions into the relationships more effectively to help to foster better feelings of inclusion and belonging. But if we never bother to look, never bother to ask, don't have them as part of our conversation, and particularly in our professional lives, if we're hiding behind a professional veneer where we have to be okay all of the time and we have to behave in certain ways and
dress certain ways
and wear our hair in certain ways and speak in certain ways, it creates division between people.
Right.
And I would love for you to speak, Jina, to how you found some of the words, particularly in the invisible dimensions.
So over the last year, as I've been building this out, different people have shared with me different elements that they experience that are part of their identity, but they don't tell anybody. And in fact, the way I design this is if you look at the waterline and you go deeper and deeper and deeper, the font gets smaller and smaller. The color gets fainter and fainter. And the reason is that the deeper we go into understanding and exploring our identities, some of that is something you will never find out unless I reveal it to you. Something like, for example, trauma. So many of us have experienced trauma in our lives, and we didn't necessarily have the words for it. I know there were some things I experienced in my childhood that I didn't really come to understand until I was an adult, and I'm continuing to work through those things. And they are part of my identity, and they are part of the lens that I am wearing all day, every day, on the way that I see things. And by starting to appreciate and understand it, I can now try to be clearer, more objective, less biased. You can't not be biased. But what you can try to do is notice when bias is influencing your thoughts, your feelings, your decisions, your perspectives. And that's hopefully what can happen. And when we look through this diversity iceberg and you look really deep down, so many of these things are things we're coming to understand more. And when you talked about, a couple times, you talked about deep listening. What I love about that is it means I'm really coming to understand you and your experience. The term lived experience specifically talks about how it recognizes it is the sum of all of the things you've experienced over the course of your lifetime, not just work, but all of your experiences that form your unique perspective. And that although you and I might have lived in the same town, went to the same church, went to the same college, studied the same topic, we're both in the accounting profession today, we will still have very unique perspectives, and that they are both equally valid. And that's what's important to understand, that this diversity is within all of us. And so that's what's important for us to think about, not just what I can see.
Yes. And getting back to that initial idea that we were talking about of facilitating JEDI discussions, how do we make these easier is welcoming the full mess of our human selves.
The mess of our human selves.
Yes. What does that look like? What does that look like to create welcoming environments for our team members, for our coworkers, our clients? And what does it look like to be able to hold the full human experience for ourselves and for each other, and be able to create the environments where we can do that and to make it easier? And it starts by having these kinds of conversations right here, by normalizing these topics, by making it so that it's not considered taboo to take a drink of water and take care of our physical form, our bodies, during a meeting.
Yep.
Hey, what does it look like to make it so that it's okay to ask for a bathroom break? Or, like recognize that human beings have human physical bodies, that we're a mess of emotions and thoughts and past experiences, and that it's complicated.
Oh, is it not? And the other part about empowering these conversations is learning what these terms mean. Mm-hmm. One of the reasons that we don't like talking about some dimensions of diversity is because we don't know how to talk about them. And this insecurity, I don't want to feel stupid. I don't want people to laugh at me. I don't want to offend somebody. Like, there are all kinds of things that keep us from engaging in conversations. Plus, and we have a slide on this. I don't know that we're going to get there, but there are a lot of things that keep us, that hold us back. We talk about authenticity. Bring your authentic self, bring your whole self to work. Can you imagine if you brought all of these things to work every day? We'd all be exhausted. But we have to recognize that they are there. And so that is what we're talking about. All right, next polling question. What comes to mind when you think about inclusion?
All right, there we are. Poll number 3 is live on your screen.
It's interesting. As I'm looking at that diversity slide while they're doing the polling question, Ingrid, I see down at the very, very bottom center, I put neurodiversity. And we are hearing a lot more about that. It was one of those terms that 2 years ago, I don't think anybody would have known. It's a medical term and we don't really know what it is, and it doesn't matter to me. Mm-hmm. And so maybe as I iterate on this slide, I should take neurodiversity and pull it up a little bit higher.
I think that's important. And I think it's also really important to acknowledge that it says neurodiversity, not neurodivergent.
Yes.
Because neurodivergent implies that there is a normal to be divergent from.
Yeah.
Whereas each of us has our own unique way of thinking, going about everything, and has our unique perspectives, viewpoints, and unique ways that our brains operate.
Yeah.
Some of which was lent to by however we grew up, which includes perhaps childhood trauma that we experience that impact the way that our brains develop. And some of it could be genetic or other biological factors. The main thing is there is no such thing as normal when it comes to the way that our brains work.
Yeah, yeah. I do want to put one caveat though, and I think from a medical perspective, if you're a doctor and you're studying and you're treating the brain, there is a term that is considered neurotypical, and that's important to understand. For example, in order to diagnose a cancer, you have to know what a non-cancerous cell looks like.
Mhm.
So there is a context for this, but not in the context we're talking about. All right, let's see. I think the poll's probably done now.
Yes. Would you like me to read it or can you see it there?
I can see it. Can you?
All
You
right.
can read it. I don't know if Ingrid can see it.
I do not see it right now, but go for it.
So 43% said belonging, 24% social connection, a tie with 14% between intention and safety, and 6% prefer not to answer.
So what comes to mind when you think about inclusion? And so many people said belonging. And I love that. I think for me, let me put this slide up here. Belonging and inclusion, and we've had these conversations, are two sides of the same coin. A lot of us talk about inclusion, but Ingrid, I could try really, really hard and I can do my best in my language and my behavior and whatnot, but I cannot make you feel like you belong. I just can't. But what I can do is try to behave in a way that shows to you, I demonstrate, not just words, but actions and behaviors and decisions, that you are safe here with me, that I see all of that messy difference, dimensions of diversity within you and accept them all, and that you can simply be how you are today, and it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
My intention then is to be inclusive. What I hope the outcome of that is you feel a sense of belonging. So that's a bit of a trick question,
It is tricky. And so Brene Brown writes on belonging a bit, and it's tricky in our current kind of power over paradigm. We get programmed from a very young age to believe that we're not enough. Yeah. And even some of the first things that we think when we wake up, didn't get enough sleep and there's not enough time and not enough to go around, and that it comes down to this idea that maybe we're not enough.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the blaming and shaming language that gets used on children when they're kids of, someone's a bad girl or a bad boy and shame on you. Oh. Those kinds of ideas like that programs us in certain ways to having emotional responses where maybe we feel like we're going to be rejected if we don't behave in a certain way. And so some of the things that we're working on in the Accounting Alchemy Network, which you mentioned at the very, very beginning, are what does it look like to cultivate better environments where we can all feel belonging? And what does that look like?
Right.
And one of the things that Brene Brown talks about in her newest book, Atlas of the Heart, she talks about this idea of belonging anywhere and nowhere. That similar to what you just said about inclusion and belonging being two sides of the same coin, but inclusion is one thing we offer to others. Belonging is something that we have to claim for ourselves.
Yes.
And on the one hand, I might feel like I don't belong in a certain group of people because maybe I'm not being included. Maybe I don't fit with those people. But does that mean that I don't belong? Does that mean that I'm not enough?
Yeah.
And one of the practices that we employ in the Accounting Alchemy Network is we start off pretty much every meeting with a bit of a grounding practice to create intentional space. And part of the intentional spaces that I like to create when I'm the one leading that grounding is really just getting into our bodies in this place and time, in this moment, taking some nice deep breaths and expanding our awareness to the ecosystems that surround us and recognizing that we are part of these ecosystems. Part of the power over paradigm that we're trying to shift away from is this the idea that humanity is somehow in control of or above our natural systems and our environments. And what does it look like to actually be part of nature? And when we can feel into the balance, that beautiful dance of all of the life around us, the plants and animals, the microbiome in the soil, the fungi and bacteria, and even the wind and rain and stones, everything around us is part of a system that is alive, and we are part of that system. And when we can feel into that and just take a moment to be there, recognizing that we are human beings, not human doings, that we are worthy, we are enough, and we can belong anywhere.
I wrote down when you said claim belonging for yourself, that on my own terms, it's not up to somebody else to define and tell me what belonging feels like for me. And so this falls into the same conversation, that it isn't a question of prescription. It is understanding and giving yourself permission. You know, I call it fearless inclusion. My definition of fearless inclusion starts with me, starts with each of us. Because until I can feel comfortable just simply being, it's really difficult to create a space where I can invite others to do the same.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, I put the asset, liability, equity up here because you were talking about grounding, and it's really important. And it's funny, I actually was going to ask you before today's session, did you want to take a moment to do it? And for those of you, one of the things, Ingrid does this beautifully. What I would invite you to do, if you've never done this, is the next time you start a meeting, before you all just jump right in, just pause and take a couple of breaths and ask everybody to get present and be, you know, in the space with you where they are, recognizing that, you know, you said it, Ingrid, you can feel the chair beneath you or the feet, the ground underneath you and the energy around you. And if you just spent 1 minute doing that and slowing things down, you'd be amazed at how good you feel. So thank you for reminding us of that, Ingrid. Well, we're getting really close to time. And before we wrap up, we did put this slide here. You know, what are some of the things you can do? So we've defined justice, we've defined equity, we looked at the different dimensions of diversity, and we've talked about inclusion and tied in belonging. What can we invite all of you to do? What are some ideas that you can take away to try to facilitate some of these conversations, talk about these things, explore these things a little bit more? We came up with a whole bunch of ideas, but here, please, like we said here, drop in the Q&A other ideas and we'll read them out and we'll share them, as well as your questions, because we will have some time for Q&A here.
I want to note, while people are putting their ideas in the chat, just speaking to a few of these. And one that I absolutely love and want to call out is the oops and ouch. And oops and ouch is a practice that we employ in our JEDI training through the Accounting Alchemy Network. So Justice, Equity, Diversity, Inclusion training. So we can all learn to be JEDIs. And what does that look like? Oops is the ability to, when we recognize that we've said something that, you know, maybe did not come out quite right, to be able to just say, oops, that was not what I meant to say. That landed strange. Like I can tell that did not come across well. Or on the flip side of that, if somebody else says something, to be able to say, ouch, actually, that didn't land well. Do we want to try that again? Or can we talk about that? Can we lean in? And to cultivate healthy, effective tools to be able to discuss some of the really challenging topics in our world, particularly racial division and other justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion issues, without it turning into a blame-shame conversation.
Yes. I think the beauty of oops and ouch, for those of you who are willing to consider giving it a try, is it can simply just be the word. We can be having a conversation and I can say, oops. And what if we all created this space? It is a safe space where I can say, oops, you will trust my good intention, acknowledge oopsies that I've made, and then we move on. We don't have to get stuck in a deep dive defending what I said and making sure that everybody heard it the way I meant, because that's how we move away from the meaningful conversations. By the way, before we go any further, can you talk to appreciative inquiry? There are a couple coming in and I'll read them when you're done, but appreciative inquiry I think is so important as well.
Yeah, appreciative inquiry is just the practice of asking questions with genuine curiosity. So when we notice that there is difference, I mean, thinking about Stephen Covey's 7 Habits for Highly Effective People, habit number 6 is the habit of synergy. And the habit of synergy is recognizing that the diversity is our greatest asset when we're trying to think of new ideas, that the diversity of perspectives in the room and lived experiences is how we're going to come up with ideas that no one's ever thought of before, and that the whole is so much greater than the sum of the parts. And appreciative inquiry is how we get there. So when we see, oh, someone has a different viewpoint than I do, rather than being shut down and trying to get everybody on the same page and have power over and control and win an argument, be like, I haven't heard that before. Will you tell me more about that? That's really fascinating. Where did that come from? Like, where did you learn that? What was your lived experience? Can you tell me that story? Or simply, what is it like to be you?
Oh, yeah. Curiosity. I remember I was watching this YouTube video years ago, and the line that I've never forgotten is, you can't hate something if you're curious about it. And that is so true, because when you are curious, it interrupts all of these other processes in your brain and starts to have you like turning things around and exploring things in a way that you can't be making decisions about them and judging them, because you're trying to figure it out. So I love that one. Thank you. By the way, some ideas are coming in. One is listen. You'd be amazed, but we practice a lot of selective listening in our profession. We are listening to see what it is I need to correct, but we're not necessarily listening to understand what you are experiencing. Mm-hmm. The only way that I can practice empathy is by understanding and getting a sense of what you are feeling, what you are experiencing, the impact something is having on you, so that I can connect to that feeling. And so that's, really important listening. It's active, empathetic listening. I love this one. Say hi to everyone that you see throughout the day. You'd be surprised, but I live in the Washington, D.C. area, and people aren't nice here. I actually did that a couple times on the metro. I said hi to people as I went on the metro, and people looked at me. What is she? Does she want something? And I was surprised how gentle kindness like that might be distracting to some.
It makes such a huge difference. And if you're not used to it, it can be kind of jarring. Yeah. I love what Jim says. Put yourselves in the shoes of fellow human beings. That's so important. And Timothy, leaning into the discomfort, make discomfort acceptable as a means of getting to a better place. I absolutely love that. And we were just having that conversation in a discussion with the Accounting Alchemy Network earlier this week. We had Seth Feinberg on, hosting a group discussion on what it looks like to live in the uncomfortable, to live in our stretch zone where we're learning and growing, and cultivating that as a skill is so essential.
Yeah, it is. It is really important. A lot of us run away from discomfort. Mm-hmm. And one of the things we all know is you don't learn by getting it right the first time. You learn by getting it wrong. Mm-hmm. And if people can create a space where stumbling and falling is safe, because they're going to help you get back up again and help you learn so that you don't fall next time. If we can go back to those moments, those were uncomfortable moments, but they were growth moments. They were growth opportunities. So yes, thank you, Timothy. There's another one. Jessica said, bring a treat to the office to share with everyone. Now, I will caveat that with one thing. Not everybody's going to like the treat, and that's okay. So we don't want to get our feelings hurt. That's the whole thing about diversity. But if everybody brought treats every day, can you imagine how many things we could have to enjoy?
Can you imagine how fat I'd be?
I know, right?
Oh my gosh, everyone's bringing treats every day.
And I feel obligated to have a little bit of everything.
Exactly.
I know.
Shucks.
Do you see? I think the name is Kareen, positive experience sharing.
Mm-hmm.
How about we don't sit around and complain, but we share those beautiful moments that we just experienced, or that amazing thing that we just saw, or something that I just observed that was beautiful between other people. That is, I love that one.
Yeah.
Trying to see if there's anything else that came in. Well, what I do want to also do while you were gone, a question came in about let me go back to, hang on, I'm going to get there. Okay. A question came back to this illustration and suggested that somehow it appears to be illustrating a zero-sum game, that you have to take a box away from one person to give a box to another person. And when I asked them to clarify it, what they said was, oh, that's what it says, that somebody has to give up a box to get a box. And I think what I hope you notice in the reality image is that there are a lot more boxes than the boxes that you see in the first two. And it's really just making sure that we all have what we need. Or if the box itself is the barrier and the fence here is the barrier, we don't need the tool, the box, if we take down the fence. So it isn't a thing about we take this box from you to give it to this person so that we can all have the same, but it's about looking at the picture holistically and seeing what do we need to do so that nobody needs a box.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Jina. And I also want to speak to something really important in the chat. Someone, I'm not going to name names, said, saying you would feel fat was rude. Ouch. And I want to acknowledge and thank you for the ouch. And I think for myself, not saying that intention replaces impact in any way, because that is an important thing to recognize, that there was an ouch impact. And my intention, what I was trying to communicate in there, is that in that situation, I would be personally challenged in making healthy eating choices. And that is in no way a reflection on anyone else's eating choices or anything like that, that I would feel tempted by the sweets all around me and would probably end up making choices that are not the best for me in that situation.
And
so
I would share that challenge.
Playing to that. And I also really, really appreciate you voicing that ouch so that I could clarify that intention, because it was in no way meant to be a reflection on the foods that we choose to have around or blaming or shaming anyone else. And I thank you so much for having the bravery to post that and call it out.
Yeah, thank you for seeing that, Ingrid. I missed that one. Autumn, can we go ahead and launch that last polling question? We want everybody to get their CPE.
Sure, that fourth poll is up and running. If you missed one for any reason, make sure to cast your vote here. What would you like to do as a follow-up to today's program?
While that's up there, I just want to do a quick promo for next month. So the series is the last Friday of every month now. And so next month, I'm going to be talking with Claire Costin. She's this brilliant researcher and academic who will be talking to us about that power of listening. What can we learn by listening to the undergraduates that are coming out? What are they telling us about our profession? What can we learn from the new hires? What can we learn from the data? And listening to all of that. So that's what we're going to be exploring. In 4 weeks, I think. I can't do spontaneous math. But the end of March 20, what did I say on here? 9th? Ingrid, as we wrap up, thank you for joining me. I knew this would be an amazing conversation because you're amazing and incredible. So thank you.
I love having these conversations with you, Jina. And I love that we get to create opportunities to have these discussions throughout the accounting profession, particularly in the Accounting Alchemy Network, and that we're getting to learn and grow together and figure out how to make having these conversations easier and lean into this discomfort and show up for all of this, for all of everyone trying to do this work together.
Yeah, I would say that, and make these conversations safer.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. And thank you everyone for joining us. I appreciate you taking the time on a Friday afternoon to join us on today's conversation.